This is Sophia, and this is
Carol.
and I am going to be interviewing her on her educational experiences growing up in Switzerland and how her life evolved.
Thank you. So, as Sophia said, my name is Carol, and I grew up in Switzerland. My mother was American, and my father was Swiss. I was born in the French part of Switzerland, and I then moved to the Swiss German part with my family when I was a half a year old. And of course, I don't remember any of the French we spoke at that point, but I grew up speaking Swiss German and English for all of my childhood. So you can, of course, notice an accent, and that is because I learned English from my father as well as my mother, and my father spoke English with a Swiss accent.
So, your father was born in Switzerland and your mother was born in the United States of America.
That is very correct. So my father was Swiss, and he had come over here to Boston and was doing a fellowship, a postdoctoral fellowship in chemistry in the Harvard University laboratory. And my mother had a master's degree in chemistry, and she was working there. So they ended up falling in love. They spent a little bit of time moving from one place to the other here to different jobs, and then my father had a job back in Switzerland, and so they moved there, which is where my brother and I were born. So when we moved to the Swiss German part of Switzerland, we moved to a lake, which is the Lake of Zurich, and I was raised in a little village named Männedorf, and that little village was very close to, it was basically close to the lake and in walking distance, so I could always take walks with my mother to the lake, and my father actually had a sailboat, so we often went sailing. So I have memories of my mother, my father, my brother and myself often on the weekends going sailing, and we took our little dog Scamp along, and those were actually kind of happy times. So you might wonder about my parents, and my dad was quite high strung because he was working in forensic chemistry, and that's a very responsible job that he had, because he was responsible for a lot of crimes that he had to find out who was the person who was innocent and who might have been the victim, or who was the perpetrator. And since he was very, very good at his work, he got sent to him some international and national cases which had been already not solved correctly in other labs, and then they were sent to him. So he ended up being quite a high profile forensics chemist in Switzerland, and if you would look for his name, you would find that he was responsible for some high profile cases that were solved. So as a result, he worked many long hours, and during the week I hardly saw him. When I got up, he was already on the train to work, and when I was in bed, he came home, usually after I was already in bed. But he never failed to come into my room, and he would sit down, and he would usually tap his fingers on the bed because he loved piano playing, and then he would tell me some stories. And the stories he told me were always about character skills, which he had developed during his childhood. And some of those stories are very important to me, and I still remember them.
I'm sure we would love to hear some of those stories.
So, well, one of the stories is that he was sent to a children's home when he was quite young because he had tuberculosis. And in that children's home, he was the youngest of all of the children there. And they were not always very nice to him, and nobody wanted to play with him. But he was always watching them play chess. And he would sit there and watch and learn and watch. And one day, someone asked him to play, and he played with this child who was much older than him, and my father won. And at that time, he finally was able to become one of the group, and he was able to play chess with these people. So that's one of the stories he shared.
That's an amazing story.
Yes, and my mother, while my father was very hands-off, he kind of left parenting up to my mother. My mother loved having a good time. She loved sledding, she loved reading books, she loved taking walks, and anything which a child would enjoy doing, she enjoyed doing as well. So we would take long walks, we would often go sledding, and she always read storybooks at that time, like old storybooks that she had loved in her childhood, including The Secret Garden and Little Men and Little Women. So I grew up really enjoying all of those American or English books that she read to me. And
tell me a little bit about your older brother. How many years older than he was? And
how many years older was he? Yes, so my brother is 6.5 years older. And when I was born, I think he was pretty happy to have a younger sister. But he also told my father, why don't you put the train set into the attic so I wouldn't get to it. But that was pretty much the only time he ever said anything which wasn't so nice. He was so caring and always nice to me. And he really took well care of me. He was very, very quiet, and he's very academic, just like my parents. So he spent most of his time studying, and he was always in his room studying after school. And as a result, of course, he was very high achieving, and he then received a full scholarship to Harvard. And when he was, I think, about 20 years old, he transferred over to Harvard, and he was here in the United States ever since. He studied physics, and he is a well-known astrophysics professor and travels the world. But he has always been a very kind and thoughtful person, and always very, very helpful to me.
Tell me a little bit about the school system in Switzerland. Is it the same how it is here?
Well, the school system in Switzerland is actually quite different. The mandatory school years, unlike here, are 9. So when I was going to school then, many of my peers went to school for 9 years. It consisted of kindergarten, of course, that's separate, and then 6 years of primary school and 3 years of secondary school. So that's actually what I also did. I went to 6 years of primary school and then 3 years of secondary school. And I can, of course, share also what I did after that, but those were my mandatory school years. So when I was 15, I had my mandatory school years completed.
That's amazing. And in your younger school years, what were your favorite experiences, and did you have a teacher who impacted you?
Yes, so in kindergarten, which is also quite different, I think, than it is here, I actually always walked to school. I had a fairly long walk. I had to walk along several busy streets, and I was always walking alone, or with a friend. So my kindergarten years were in a play-based kindergarten. We never learned any reading or writing there or any math. The only thing we had to do was, at the end of our kindergarten years, we had to show the teacher that we knew how to tie our shoelaces. That was our kindergarten graduation task. And of course, it was a little bit nerve-wracking, but I was able to demonstrate that I was able to tie my shoelaces. So when I was very young, maybe because I grew up bilingually and was not so confident yet in Swiss German, I never spoke with adults. And I only spoke with my friends and my family. So in school, in kindergarten, we had the option of saying to the teacher, "Hello, Auntie," or we could say, "Hello, Mrs. Williger." And since I did not want to decide what I would call her, I never called her anything, and I avoided speaking. There was only one time when I actually raised my hand, and that was when after a weekend we always had sharing, and we could sit around in a circle and raise our hand if we had something to share. And we had this adventure over the weekend where my family and I went hiking. And so we had taken a hike and we walked all the way down to a river, and we thought there was a bridge there, but there wasn't. So my father crossed the river and then he couldn't get back. So we had to walk all by ourselves back up with my mother, and my father went a different route. And as a child, that was rather scary. So I raised my hand, and I was surprised that the teacher, of course, chose me to speak. And I still remember word by word what I said. Of course, I couldn't express the adventure, so I just said, "We went walking, and we walked down, and then we walked up again." That's exactly what I said. In Swiss German, of course.
And can you say it in Swiss German?
Yes. So I said to the teacher, "Wir sind gelaufen und dann sind wir runtergegangen und dann sind wir wieder raufgegangen." So that was my one time when I spoke in kindergarten. So my kindergarten life was marked, I think, also by a tragedy, because one day when I was walking home with my little friend, who we always walked to school together in my second year of kindergarten, we decided we would take a little walk down to one of the fountains along a different road where we could get a drink of water. And when we arrived there, a car was right in front of the fountain, and one of our kindergarten friends was on the road, and he was not moving. And some people were walking around the car, and even though I was 5 years old, I knew immediately that he was no longer alive. So I said to my friend, "Is he dead?" And my friend said yes. And then a lady came over and said, "Run home," which is what we did. We ran all the way home, and I came up to my mother, and I said, "I'm not feeling well, and I'm going to bed." And I went to bed, and I never told my parents what I had seen.
Wow.
Yeah, so it took me years to ever speak about that experience, and as a result, I am very, very careful with children around cars, which I believe that's a good thing. It's always good to be careful. But overall, I think my kindergarten years were good ones, and because they were play-based and walking to school, they, there were many adventures and things that I learned. So in the lower school, of course, I became a little bit more talkative and I had good friends, but I still had to walk to school alone. And there was one interesting experience I had where each day when I would walk to school, when I was on my way home, I would walk past a farm. And there was a boy who would come out from the farmhouse and he would walk up to me and he would say, in German, say something in English or I will hit you. And of course, I was concerned and I didn't quite know how to react to that. So after this had happened repeatedly, one day at the dinner table, we always had supper together at that point, and my father was there. I told my parents what had been happening. And he thought for a moment, and you know, where these days maybe parents would get upset and call a teacher or, you know, try to reach out to that family. He thought for a moment and then he said, next time when he says that, tell him that he is a very silly boy and then ask him if he understood it. So I now knew what I would be doing and I kind of was looking forward to this happening again, and sure enough, the next day on my way home, there he was. And he said, say something in English. So I said, you are a very silly boy. And then I said, did you understand? And he said, yes. And he turned away and he never stopped me again. So the interesting thing actually is that when I came home, my father never ever asked about it. So he trusted us, me and myself and my brother, to be able to fend for ourselves. And I really appreciated that because I learned to be able to deal with whatever came my way myself and not immediately look for help from adults. So my school years, I think, in those 6 school years were actually quite happy. I had good friends and good teachers, and even though I never imagined that I would one day become a teacher myself, I had good experiences learning. And then came secondary school. And secondary school, of course, is when one becomes an adolescent. So those are maybe a little bit more tricky years. And we had a lot of teacher changes, but it was still okay. But it was then that I think I realized that I have some maybe learning differences, because when learning was more based on listening for a long time to a teacher tell a story or tell some type of a history lesson, and it's primarily oral, then I would realize that I would be looking out the window and I didn't remember anything the teacher said. So I didn't really realize that it was something that I was struggling with, because I couldn't really compare it to anything else, but now in retrospect I know.